Hello, today I'll be going over Section 2 Microeconomics Perfectly Competitive Markets. So, first, what is a market? A market comprises of all the buyers and sellers of a particular good or service. The interactions between buyers and sellers, also known as supply and demand, is the central topic of microeconomics. Perfectly competitive markets. We say a market is perfectly competitive if the good or service is highly standardized, meaning that the good is consistent, the number of buyers and sellers is large, and all the participants are well informed about the market price. One buyer and seller alone cannot influence the market price. Take a moment to pause this video and note these points down. Only a few markets actually conform to the assumptions of perfect competition. One nearly perfectly competitive market would be gasoline. Studying perfectly competitive markets provides a benchmark to studying other types of markets. Demand. So, the quantity demand of any good is the amount of goods buyers are willing and able to purchase. One important factor is a good's price. So, higher price means less demand and vice versa. The negative relationship between a good's price and quantity demand is called the law of demand. So, law of demand is basically saying as the price of one good increases, the demand for that same good will decrease, and vice versa. If the price of the good decreases, the demand for that good will increase. This is a negative relationship. Negatives. A demand schedule is a table, such as the one on the right, that shows the quantity demand at each price. The demand curve is a downward sloping line, so it's negative, where price is on the y-axis and quantity demand is on the x-axis. To find the market demand curve, which is the total demand, we add up individual demand curves horizontally. So for this slide, we have Nora and Steve. If we want to find the market demand curve, we will add each of these horizontally. So this line and this line will add up to this line. And notice how each line is negative. So the x-axis is our quantity demand and our y-axis is our price. So as price increases, demand will decrease. Um, Quantity demand is a point on the curve. This is really important. It is for sure going to have a question over this. Quantity demand is a point on the curve. Only price changes quantity demand. So quantity demand is a point, while demand is the entire curve. It's the whole line. There are multiple factors that can cause the demand curve to shift. The first one being income. So basically, it's saying the first thing would be normal goods. When your income rises, the demand for goods also rises. So when our income rises, the demand for new goods will increase. For example, when we make more money, we'll probably buy more clothing, more food, cars, and electronics. While inferior goods are goods where the demand falls as income rises. So normal goods are goods where demand increases, where income increases. Inferior goods are goods where demand falls as income rises. An example would be bus rides. Individuals would likely buy a car and drive instead of taking the bus. So they would make more money, so the demand for bus rides will decrease. We call these normal and inferior goods. The next would be the price of related goods. So when a decline of one good causes a reduction in the other, we call these goods are substitutes. So basically, we're saying that these goods can replace one another. Um, One good example would be Coke and Pepsi. So if we increase the price of Coke, the demand for Pepsi would probably increase because Pepsi would be the next alternative to Coke because we don't want to buy expensive soda, right? Um, yeah, we call these substitutes. We can replace one another. They're interchangeable. When a lower price for one good causes the demand for another good to increase, we call these complements. For example, tennis rackets and tennis balls, these are often bought together. We usually don't see them by themselves. They often are used together. We call these complements. Another one would be like peanut butter and jelly. Next is taste. So taste is more about like advertisements, trends, and attitudes about certain goods. So like some trends will cause a higher demand for a certain good. One example would be like environmental impact would cause people to be more concerned about pollution. Thus, people will less likely use gasoline, so the demand for gasoline will decrease. Expectations. This one's a little weird, but basically, it's saying that when you expect something to occur in the future, it may also affect the demand. So this example was from the book. If were afraid that you're going to lose your job next month, hopefully you don't. You might cut down on driving in anticipation of this future change in income. So you're going to cut down. So you're going to cut down on driving. So you're going to use less gasoline. So the demand for gasoline will decrease in anticipation of this future change in income because you're going to make less money. So if you're going to like make less money, you're going to want to cut down on your expenses. Hopefully that makes sense. And then the last one would be number of buyers. Market demand is derived by adding the demands of individual consumers. So if we have more buyers, the demand will increase. And this is a really nice table I made. Take a moment to pause this video and read out loud. Don't passively learn this material, right? Um, this is a really nice mnemonic. IP10. So I is income, P is price of related good, T is taste, E is expectations, and N is number of buyers. And huge emphasis on the last line. Quantity demanded is affected only by price, and it's a point on the curve of the demand curve. So, and also, if a good is more expensive, you'll have less demand. If it's less expensive or cheaper, you'll have more demand. This is called law of demand. Okay, now I'll be going on to the next slide, which is supply. So supply is very similar to demand, but quantity supplied of any good is the amount that sellers of that good are willing and able to produce at a given price. So it's something that they will be able to produce. And the most important factor for supply is the price that suppliers receive. It influences quantity supplied. Remember on the previous slide, quantity demand is affected by price. Whenever you see quantity, think of price. The higher the price, the greater quantity the suppliers will want to produce. This is called law of supply. It's a positive relationship. Remember that demand is a negative relationship. So, as the price between price and quantity supplied, so as your price increases, the quantity supplied increases. This is a positive relationship. Um, So if they're making more money, it's more rational to devote more resources to supplying that good that gives them more money, right? Um, as long as the price they receive exceeds their opportunity cost, they will be willing to supply that good at lower prices. So if they make less money from selling that good, they'll cut back on time and resources used to produce a good. And remember, and as I said before, supply is positive. It's an upward sloping and reflects the relationship between price and quantity supplied. So as price increases, your quantity supplied will also increase. And the market supply curve is obtained by adding the quantity supplied at each price of all the suppliers in the market. Like the main curve, there are many factors that can cause the supply curve to shift. First, let's look at the graph of a supply curve. So this one is a graph of the supply curve. We have Shelley and Luther right here. So to get to the market supply, you would add each of these values horizontally, and we'll end up here. And yeah, supply is positive, so each of these lines are positive. Okay, here are the factors that shifts shifts in supply, or what shifts supply curves. The first would be input prices. Input prices are just things that suppliers have to purchase to supply a good. Sorry. Um, so, for example, gasolines, they must supply their pay for gasoline, labor costs, and real estate costs and utilities. So, if the price of input price falls, the supply of that good will increase, causing the supply curve to shift to the right. So that means we're going to have, if the input price falls, so less money to produce a certain good, you'll have more to produce and you'll have more supply. And if the input increases, so it costs more to supply that good, that supply will decrease. Technology. So technology, basically it's saying like advancements in technology can affect how businesses operate and hence the supply. So this goes back with the input prices. The shift from full service to self-service reduces labor costs and increases supply. So input prices would be the labor cost, and if that's going down, that means the supply would go up. And expectations is your next one. So this one is the same as demand. So if suppliers expect price to rise in the future, they may reduce the supply today and store current inventory in expectation of higher future prices. That was a mouthful. But next, this example will make it make sense. So if a juice company anticipates the price of juice to rise due to a natural disaster, the company will store frozen concentrate. So they're anticipating a natural disaster. And so if they're anticipating, they're gonna stock up on concentrate, so they'll have more supply because of they expect a natural disaster. And the last one is the number of sellers. So as more sellers enter the market, the supply will increase because there's more like people supplying the market. So, for example, when Apple first introduced the iPad, there were a few popular tablets in the market. Other computer manufacturers soon produced their own tablet, increasing the supply of tablets in the market. So, this is saying that other computer manufacturers entered this market, thus, the number of sellers increased, and thus the supply also increased. And this is another table. I recommend pausing this video. Another mnemonic that probably would be really useful to memorize is NITE. So N stands for number of sellers, I is input prices, T is technology, and E is expectations. Okay, and then I'll be going over to the next slide, which is market equilibrium. So market equilibrium. So what equilibrium is? It means like constant balance, right? So market equilibrium happens when no participant in the market has a reason to alter their behavior. So graphically, it's where the market supply and demand curves intersect. Remember that supply is positive sloping, while demand is negative. And the point of intersection is our point of equilibrium. At this point, the buyers and sellers in this market are all satisfied. Um, An important feature of market equilibrium is that it tends to gravitate towards a combination of price and quantity. And this graph shows where equilibrium is. So remember, demand is negative sloping, supply is positive. So the point where they intersect is called our equilibrium. Now we go over on to excess supply, also known as surplus. So basically, what excess supply is, given the name, it's more supply than what producers or sorry consumers would actually buy. So it's the good or service that producers are willing to sell at a given price that is greater than the quantity that consumers are willing to buy at that same price. So basically, there's a lot of stock, but people don't want to buy it. Because people don't want to buy it, suppliers have an incentive to lower the price of it because they want to get rid of their stock. They have too much in inventory, if that makes sense. So graphically, this is what it looks like. So supply is on the right side, so we have more on supply on this region, and we have less demand in this region. So we have more supply right here, and less demand right here. This region over here, this region is called our surplus or excess supply, surplus in supply. In this region, we have more supply than less demand. Sorry, more supply than demand. So suppliers have an incentive to lower their prices a bit, so to increase demand. And the opposite would be excess demand. So instead of suppliers, um, buyers are willing to buy more goods than the supplier wants to supply. So they there's a too much demand and too little supply. Buyers may pay a little extra because like said before, the supply is low, so they're paying a little extra to be sure they get what they want or need. And graphically, it's in this region where we have more demand this time, it's on the right, and less supply. Okay. And then we have the characteristics of competitive market equilibrium. Competitive markets tend to gravitate toward the equilibrium, oh my gosh, equilibrium quantity and price. This is important feature for markets. So first, what competitive markets are good at, it's extremely effective in allocating resources, right? When the market for a good is in equilibrium, the price tells important information for potential suppliers about the value consumers place on a good. So basically, it tells us that consumers and suppliers and how much they value this certain good. The price also informs potential demanders about the opportunity cost of supplying the goods. So it also tells us the opportunity cost. Sorry for that wonky oval. And then the second characteristic of market competitive market equilibrium is that it maximizes benefits and sellers receive. For buyers, the height of the market demand curve at each price reveals the marginal buyer's willingness to pay. A marginal buyer is someone who has the lowest willingness to pay for a good or service. They are indifferent about buying the good or not buying it. Marginal buyers, basically, if the price of that good increases, they will automatically leave the market. So they have the lowest willingness to pay. Now, let's take this for example. If you want to go to a concert and you would pay $100 for it. If the ticket is more, you don't buy it. If it's less, you buy it. If you buy something that is less, you call it than what you would actually pay for. This is called consumer surplus. So let's say the ticket actually costs $40, but you initially wanted to pay $40. You have a surplus value of 60. The height of the demand curve minus the market price equals the consumer surplus. So let's look at this graph right here. This line right here is the market price, and this is the consumer's willingness to pay. The region above the region above the market price and below the consumer's willingness to pay is called the consumer's surplus. Now, the height of the supply curve. To each quantity supply measures the willingness to supply the marginal seller, which is a seller who would leave the market If the price was any lower, the height measures the opportunity cost to the marginal seller. If the market price exceeds the opportunity cost, the difference is in monetary measure is called producer surplus. So producer surplus is the region under the market price and above the curve. So this is producer surplus. Now, if we combine consumer surplus and producer surplus, we are given total surplus, and it's the measure of total benefits participants receive. So when we maximize total surplus, we also produce the greatest good overall. This satisfies Pareto efficiency, since at this point there's no way to make anyone better without reducing the welfare of someone else. Now I'll be going over some practice problems, so take a moment, pause this video, and yeah, okay. So question 15. If the price of Coke increases, it is most likely that the A. Demand curve for Coke will shift to the left. B. Quantity demand for Pepsi will decrease. C. Quantity demand of Coke will increase. D. Demand curve for juice will shift to the right. E. Price of soda tumblers increase. So let's go through each individual answer. A. Demand curve for Coke will shift to the left. Well, let's see. Demand curve is unaffected by price. Remember, for demand curve, we think of IP10. Sorry, this takes a while. So price does not affect demand curve. It only affects quantity demand. So we can automatically eliminate A. Quantity, and let's see answer B. Quantity demand for a Pepsi will decrease. Well, if price of Coke increases, would Pepsi the demand will decrease? Well, actually, it would increase because if Coke increases, the next best alternative to Coke would be Pepsi. The, the actual demand for Pepsi would not decrease because Pepsi never, the price of Pepsi never increased. So that doesn't make sense. Then C, quantity demand of Coke will increase. If we increase the price of Coke, why would the demand of Coke increase? This goes against law of demand. So we can eliminate C. And then D says the main curve of juice will shift to the right. Okay, this one seems like the right answer. Remember the P. P stands for price of related goods. Um, and also juice. Juice would be considered like a substitute good. We can replace Coke and juice. So that would make the most sense because if Coke increases, the demand for Coke will decrease, so the demand for juice will increase. So D would make the most sense. And yeah, D is our best answer. Juice and soda are substitute goods. Therefore, if the price of Coke increases, we would expect the demand curve for juice to shift to the right as the opportunity cost of drinking Coke increases. Okay, the next question. Which of the following scenarios would not cause the quantity supplied of cell phones increase? So A, Microsoft, a cell phone supplier, discovers a new technology that increases productivity. B, the price of lithium batteries and input decreases. C, Orange, a new cell phone supplier, enters the market. D, LG, a cell phone supplier, expects prices to decrease in the future. E, Apple, a major cell phone supplier, decides to close a production facility. So for this one, we can think of NITE, NITE, where N is the number of sellers, I is input prices, T is technology, and E is expectations. So A, this one talks about technology, so that would cause an increase in productivity. So we can eliminate A because that would increase the quantity supply of cell phones. B, the price of lithium batteries and input decreases. So input decreases, that means the supply will increase. That's wrong. That's right, but it's not uh, right with the question. C. Orange. A new cell phone supplier enters the market. Because we have more suppliers, it goes with N. Number of sellers increase. That means the supply also increases. So C is wrong. LG, a cell phone supplier, expects prices to decrease in the future. So this goes with expectations, E. So if we expect price to decrease, that means the supply of cell phones would increase in the future. So that wouldn't go. And then last one, E. Apple, Apple, a major cell phone supplier, decides to close a production facility. So when we're closing a production facility, we're actually decreasing the amount of supplies because we're closing a facility that produces cell phones. So when we close down a production facility, the supply would actually go down, not increase. So our best answer would be E. If Apple, a major cell phone supplier, decides to close a production facility, that would cause the quantity supplied of cell phones to decrease, not increase. Oh, okay. Um, I guess the answer explanation didn't get blocked out, but that's okay. Suppose the current quantity supplied of grapes is 500. At what level of quantity demand would sellers have an incentive to lower prices? A 450, B 1000, C 550, D 600, and E. Um, so for this one, what's the only number that is less than 500? That would be A. Sellers have an incentive to lower prices when quantity supplied exceeds quantity demand. If the current quantity supplied of grapes is 500, excess supply would be positive when quantity demand is only 450. Okay, and then the last question. In competitive markets, the price tells consumers the A. Value placed on the good by the highest bidder. B. Monetary cost of externalities associated with the good. C. Minimum willingness to supply by the most efficient producer. D. Opportunity cost of supplying that good. And E. Importance of the good to society. Okay, the answer to this question would be D. In competitive markets, the price reveals to consumers the opportunity cost of supplying that good. On the other side, the price reveals the supply to suppliers the value consumers place on that good. Okay, this is the end of this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.